All right, so are you ready to jump into some geopolitics?
Always.
Today we're diving into some seriously fascinating stuff about Argentina and their strategic waterways.
Sounds like a timely topic.
It really is. We're talking about their economy, how history has shaped their relationship with their waterways, and really just this quest for control over their own future.
We're going deep. We've got our metaphorical scuba gear ready to dive into this document we found called, get this, the strategic connection between our rivers and the Atlantic through our fleet of ships that navigate our rivers and sea-carrying cargo in the hands of the Argentine state.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
That's a bit of a long one, isn't it?
But don't worry, we'll unpack it all for you. It's all about Argentina, their rivers, the Atlantic Ocean, and how all of that ties into economic power and who really gets to call the shots.
This is about way more than just, like, logistics.
Right. It gets at some really big questions.
Yeah, like who controls the flow of all the goods, who's making the money, and ultimately who's deciding their economic future.
Exactly. Okay, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's set the scene a little bit. Imagine a giant map of Argentina, right? You've got these massive rivers, the Paraná and the Uruguay.
Oh, I know those rivers. Yes.
They come together, right, and then flow into the Rio de la Plata, which then empties out into the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, and that's our starting point for all of this. That spot where those huge rivers meet the ocean is key to understanding this whole thing. The Rio de la Plata is not just some river. It's this constantly shifting mix of fresh water and sediment and all these sandbanks and channels that make it, well,
really hard to navigate. So let's say you're a ship captain, right? And you're approaching this massive estuary with a shipload of cargo.
you wouldn't just, try to wing it.
No way. So what did they do?
Well, this is where the ponton recolada comes in. It was this huge EGE, permanently anchored ship, like a landmark.
So kind of like a giant floating welcome mat, or maybe more like one of those traffic cops directing ships through a construction zone. What was its purpose?
Both of those, actually.
Right.
It did welcome ships, but more importantly, it was about control. Specialized pilots, experts in navigating those waters, would meet ships there. Without those pilots, it would be incredibly risky, especially for those large ships.
Oh, wow. So those pilots sound important.
They were.
And from what we're reading, that ponton relata, it was key to Argentina controlling their own shipping traffic.
Right. And it's interesting because the location of that ponton recolada, it wasn't static. Remember those shifting sandbanks we talked about?
Mm.
Over time, the river would actually cause the ponton recolada's position to shift too.
So even this massive, seemingly permanent fixture was at the mercy of nature.
Exactly.
What happened? Did Argentina just move it back into place?
That's the thing, they didn't. Or at least not effectively enough. And as its position shifted, control of those shipping lanes shifted too.
Hold on. So as this landmark shifted, did Argentina just lose control of their shipping lanes? Like, how does that even happen? And why does it matter so much?
It's a really crucial point, and it gets at the heart of why we're talking about, canals and shipping and all that. Just imagine having to pay tolls to another country just to get goods in and out of your own ports.
That would eat into profits so fast.
For sure. And that's kind of what started happening here. Our source suggests that Uruguay, especially the Port of Montevideo, they started getting more and more influence over those important shipping routes.
So what does a country in Argentina's position even do about that? I mean, how do they regain control?
Well, that is where this Magdalena Canal project comes in. It could be a real game changer.
Okay, so tell us, what is the Magdalena Canal and how does it fit into all of this?
It's like this. Imagine bypassing that toll booth entirely. That's essentially what the Magdalena Canal is trying to do. It's a proposed dredging project to create a much deeper and, more importantly, direct route for ships going to and from Argentina's ports. They'd be able to bypass those shallower, trickier stretches of the Rio de la Plata.
Ah, so it's like building a bypass around a traffic jam, a really expensive traffic jam.
Yeah, exactly. And the source is saying this would be a win-win-win for Argentina. They'd have so much more control over their own shipping traffic. Businesses wouldn't have to rely on these foreign ports and pilots, so their costs could go down, and you even get this element of national pride. Argentina would be a bigger player in international shipping.
It's interesting how this idea of, like, controlling shipping lanes and ports, it feels like a recurring theme in history.
It makes sense, right? This isn't just some Argentine thing. It's happened all over the globe. Think back to what we were talking about, the tolls, who controls the money.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen based on who controlled these important waterways. Whoever controls the seas, or in this case the rivers, they often control all the trade, and that means they control a huge chunk of the world's wealth.
Wow, so we're talking about way more than just, like, digging a ditch and floating some boats.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It gets at economics, national pride,
Yeah.
even global power dynamics.
It does, and our source really emphasizes this point by going back and talking about Elme.
Bill, man.
Yeah, it was Argentina's state-owned shipping company. They were huge back in the day.
Oh, right. I think I've heard of them.
Well, get this. In the 1980s, Argentina had the fifth largest merchant fleet in the world. Can you believe that?
Fifth. Wow, that's impressive.
It is right. So you have this country, we were just talking about them navigating that watery obstacle course, and then boom, they're a global shipping powerhouse.
But it didn't last, did it? I mean, I'm guessing that's why I don't see Elme ships everywhere today.
You're right. It didn't last, sadly. By the 1990s, ELMA was privatized and basically dismantled. The article kind of blames it on outside pressure and also some decisions made within Argentina's government.
Wow, so Argentina went from being a global force in shipping to, what, basically having to rent out space on other countries' ships to transport their own goods. That's wild.
It is, and it shows you how connected all of this is. Economics, national interests, and this idea of, who really has control, who has sovereignty.
Right, it makes you think, who is really benefiting from all this trade? Who's setting the rates? Who's making the decisions?
And I'm guessing the Magdalena Canal is bringing up all those same questions all over again.
Oh, absolutely. Our source is a big advocate for this canal and really just for the state. Argentina having more control over shipping in general. But there are definitely other viewpoints out there too.
Oh, I bet there are. Projects like this always get people talking.
They do. It's a big decision.
So it's not as simple as, like, if you build it, they will come. There are downsides too, right?
Right, of course. Some people are saying, hey, this canal is going to be really expensive. They're worried that it might not even make that money back.
Yeah, that's always a risk with these huge infrastructure projects.
For sure. And then there's the environmental impact, right? The Rio de la Plata, it's this whole ecosystem, dredging it like that.
Yeah, it's got to be disruptive.
It's going to have an impact. There's just no way around it. And then some people are like, Argentina, why are you even trying to be a big shipping giant again? Focus on something else.
It's a lot to consider. It's economics, the environment. It's even about national identity in a way.
It really is. And I think that's what makes this whole topic, this whole deep dive, so interesting. It's not even really about boats and canals at the end of the day. It's about, choices, difficult choices, and what could happen because of them.
Especially now, right? Like with everything going on in the world, all the talk about supply chains and countries wanting to be more in control of their economies.
It's definitely resonating with a lot of people.
It really is. So as we wrap up here, I'm curious, what's your biggest takeaway from all of this? If you had to pick one thing, what would it be?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's just how important geography still is, Like we hear all the time about how globalization is making borders less important.
Right.
But the truth is, it's just not true. Rivers, coastlines, canals, all of that still matters. It shapes how economies work, how countries interact with each other, even starts arguments about, who has the right to control what.
That's a really great point. It's like this constant back and forth,
Yeah.
between what the planet's doing, the physical reality, and what humans want to do, how we want to connect with each other, but also control things.
Yeah. And you can see that tension everywhere, not just in Argentina, but all over the world. It's this balancing act.
Yeah.
Economics, the environment, national interests, how do you make it all work together, especially when the world is so interconnected. But then at the same time, geography still matters so much.
Man, it really makes you think. It's like those captains we were talking about before, trying to get their ships through the Rio de la Plata, trying to find the best way, but knowing there are risks no matter what you do.
And just like those captains relied on those expert pilots, it seems like dealing with these complex issues, it takes really careful thought, Countries need to actually talk to each other, and they need to learn from what's happened in the past.
Couldn't agree more. So, to everyone listening, as you're thinking about all of this, here's something to consider. What would a really successful, truly independent Argentine shipping industry even look like today? Could they ever get back to where they were with ALMA, but in a way that makes sense for the 21st century?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a tough one, but it's definitely worth asking.
It really is. It makes you realize that even in a globalized world, geography, those physical realities, they're still shaping our future in ways that we might not even realize.